everyone. Hello, welcome. I'm going to introduce myself because that's the situation we're in. So my name is Goodwin Gibbins. I'm a researcher at FHI, and I've been a climate scientist, just finished my PhD. I was looking at the thermodynamics of the climate system. And what we're going to do today in this workshop is we're going to try and stretch the way that we as EAs approach the topic of climate change. So I've been around EA for a long time. I've been around climate change for a long time. And one of the most important things I've found in leveraging what we have in EA to work on climate change is curiosity and humility and asking difficult questions. And so what we're going to do today as a room is try and find as many of the questions that are important to ask about climate change as we can. And we're going to write them down, collect them, and I'm going to put them up on the forum so we can take a look at that and try and build a research agenda in climate change from that. Before we start, I'd love to know how many of you guys already study climate change or work on climate change or treat it as a priority in your lives personally? Nice, okay, a room full of basically experts. How many of you, and no shame, are kind of skeptical of why we would want to think about climate change as EAs? That used to be more of a, okay, no one, great. How times have changed. Okay, so we have quite a lot of shared interest here, but I wanted to start, a thing I quite like doing is just starting by reconnecting with the two objects we're thinking about. So the first object is the climate, right? And when I say climate, you might think average weather. Weather's what you get, climate's what you expect or something. But really the climate system is this really, really deeply complicated, interconnected shell of this planet that we live on. And most of the activity and motion and forward drive of our planet that feeds into our biology, which is basically the two main things that happen on this planet, are the climate system. So the wind that blows, the rain that falls, the food that grows, all of this that we're reliant on in a really profound level is the climate system. And the thing that I sort of think about when I'm out for a walk, basically, is how complicated it is in so many specific ways, and how complicated our relationship with it is, and how we're changing it in a way that we don't necessarily know what will happen. Does anyone remember the Hogwarts school motto? It's never tickle a sleeping dragon. And that's what I think about when I think about this creature that is behind me. And the next creature that's behind us, or really in front of us and next to us, is us as an EA community. And I think it's useful also to just pause on what this creature is. So look around and think about you as a member of this community, or a member of this conference at least. We're this pretty interesting group of people who have the time and the space and the safety, basically, to think about some of the world's biggest problems. And in some sense, we're kind of guns for hire, right? We're mercenaries. We're willing to go to any problem that's a big deal. And we think we have some sort of brand of thinking, or a mode of approaching it that's going to get to some interesting answers. And I think in many ways we do, right? We can form a team who's willing to go deep into things, who's willing to put money into things that sometimes the rest of society doesn't have the time for. But actually, we're not the only people who do that in any way, and especially not in climate change. So we want to think about what it is that's our way of doing things, what we bring to this, and how we fit in with the rest of the people who are doing this. Because humanity needs people like us, or most people, really. Humanity needs people to take time to try and fix the things that go wrong. Because it's so easy for people to make things going wrong when they're being selfish, when they're being have a short vision of the future. They just need to drive from point A to point B, and then something happens that is permanent in the climate. And so we are in this interesting place of coming in and looking for opportunities for straightening things out. And I want to just spend a second to talk about what I have always seen as kind of the 3 steps in EA. I don't know if this will resonate with you, but we have this power because we stop and we check in with what we're really trying to do. And we go back to the root of it. And then we carefully research what makes sense to do. And then we act. And I think that this is far from trivial, and it gets us really far. But the thing is that sometimes we're tempted to look for simple answers. we're tempted to get to the crux of the matter and get things done. Get funding put in, make an approximation that's good enough, let's get things done. And I think the message I want you to take away from this talk, which hopefully, and this exercise that we're about to do, I'm going to speak for about 10 more minutes, and then we'll switch to the exercise, just for expectation management, is that sometimes there's a real need for and a value to slowing down and spending a kind of a ridiculous amount of time in touch with the fact that you don't know something that you need to know about the system. So nobody needed me to show this slide, it turned out, but I'm going to show it anyway, out of habit. So in the EA space, there's a lot of focus on cause areas other than climate change. And I just wanted to put forward some quick kind of arguments for what we might do as EAs thinking about climate change today. So first of all, it's a serious global threat that has to be dealt with. Maybe not the most pressing of the global threats, but it's one of them. It's far from neglected, which is actually kind of an interesting advantage, right? If there's some help that we can do to straighten out the project of dealing with climate change, we'll have the amplification of the other people working on it as well. Maybe my argument is that not the quickness that we bring, but the incisiveness and the willingness to think about difficult things that we in EA prioritize is a real contribution to a field like this. We can learn a lot from it as well. This is one of the first geopolitical negotiation agreements to deal with a public good that we've seen, and it's really cool the way it's playing out. Maybe climate change is just an example of a larger type of risk. I mean, imagine CO2 was 10 times more potent, the physics was just different. What situation would we be in, and how would we be prepared to deal with it as a global community? And it's a topic you can't help knowing a lot about. So it's quite a good example to practice different types of thinking on it, and to practice listening to the world in different ways. So with that little spiel about the EA side, let's return to the climate. So what would it be that I would like to tell you about what people think when they think about studying the climate, and what I want us to think about today? The main thing, I was thinking about this talk for a while, and I was like, the dominant thing is how much of a headache everyone who works on this project seems to have. So I would love to come in here and tell you, this is the case with climate change. These are the simple things you need to know. But I wouldn't have fit in the talk, and it hurt my brain to do it. I basically think climate change as a problem is too big a problem for a human intelligence to get their head around. There's so many details, and there's so many aspects. And what that creates, in my view, is like a tangle, right? People are seeing one part of things, and they're pulling on that thread, and they're pulling against someone in another part. Think about nuclear, right? You've got really serious environmental concerns, and on the other side, it's maybe quite a useful tool for balancing an energy grid, which is a really serious practical concern for dealing with climate change. And it's that character of a problem that we need to solve, but it's not obvious how to solve, that I think makes climate change a really fascinating type of space for us to be in as EA thinkers. And so here's the takeaway, okay? This is the attitude we're going to go forward with today. I'm curious in general to hear what you make of it, if it's something that seems obvious, if it's something that seems maybe against some other EA principles that you're used to or aligned with. The nice thing is there are things we do definitely know about climate change, right? We know that it's real. We know that it keeps getting worse. The cumulative emissions just keep accumulating until you get to net zero. We know it's hard to get to net zero. We know that it will happen within our lifetimes, that it's something that we're definitely going to face, and that humans need to know what they're going to expect in their local environment, right? That it's the kind of thing that affects so much of our daily lives, maybe less so in this beautiful building that protects us from the outdoor elements, but imagine you're living a little closer to the ground, a little closer to the earth. And there are things we definitely don't know, right? So we definitely don't know, in fact, how the climate system reacts to our perturbation. Years and years of climate science have been done on it, and if I go ask the climate scientists, hey, what do you expect? Do you think that the West Antarctic ice sheet will collapse? They just go, literally, I don't know, and I don't know how I could know. And that's quite an interesting puzzle. I have models, and I can tell you what my models tell me, but they're just a model. We don't know, what we should be adapting to locally. We kind of have a sense of some average things about the climate, but the local climate details, those are really, really hard. We don't know what emissions pathways we're going to choose to take. That's a whole different type of issue. How can we prepare for something that's dependent on the choice we make? And we don't know what the political context will do as things develop. So Russia, Ukraine, this is changing our oil supply, our gas supply. This is changing our relationship with different oil suppliers in the Middle East. This will change maybe how we feel about fracking in our country. Who knows what it will change, but everything shifts, and the things that made sense as actions are going to make different sense later on. And we also really don't know how fragile our human system is. So to what extent is the Ukraine situation affected by COVID or by climate change? This is super hard to explain. I don't really know how to project this. And so we're in this kind of sensitive world where there's some things that are knowable, and there's some things that are not known, and there isn't an easy way to just do experiments to find out. And then one of the things I think is really bad in that kind of world is to jump to thinking you know something that you don't know, right? And I was going to try and think of a few examples to kind of warm us up before we start playing with, developing the questions ourselves. And I was thinking, what are some cases where somebody has said they knew something about climate change, and then you think about it for a second, you're like, wait a sec, I'm not sure that's true. And the first one I could think of was from undergrad, when somebody said, stop overfilling your kettles for climate change. And I don't know if you guys can spot the problem with this. I'm a thermodynamicist, so if you overfill your kettle and boil too much water, it's just heat loss into the room. And most of the year, we heat our buildings, or most of the time we were in college, this was in the winter, we're heating our building anyway. So heat loss from an overboiled kettle to the room is just offset against less heating costs if you have a thermostat in your building. Potentially, depending on how the electricity is generated. Yeah, exactly. Counter-argument. Well, on the other hand, and this is the point, right? On the other hand, maybe it's less efficient, but on the other hand, great. Good point. Touche. Knew someone would do that. But then, like other things, like making sure all our car tires are properly inflated, this doesn't have that kind of trade-off. If our car tires are better inflated, we use less petrol. This isn't something you see prioritized as a action people can do. Like, what's up with the things that we think of and don't think of and the things we miss? Okay, so that might be kind of silly, but what about in the EA space? So one of the EA moves we've made is to try and find ways to optimize our interventions with climate change. And one of the classic optimizations that we look for is the cheapest marginal emission reduction. What's the most cost-effective way to abate CO2 emissions? And one interesting thing has been, like, it's not obvious that this makes sense as a way of thinking. You'd think this was like solid ground, right? But here's a point where it doesn't make sense. Let's think about reforestation. So there's a study done where they mapped all the potential places on the whole Earth where we could reforest. And basically they added up all the potential for reforestation. And they calculated how much CO2 you could possibly do if you maxed out on reforestation. And they found this number, 205 gigatons of carbon. And I don't think they mentioned this in the paper, but what happens if you look up that number, 205 gigatons of carbon, you find out that it's basically exactly the same amount of carbon as what we deforested away. So you can't plant any more trees than we got rid of. So that's the number up there from Carbon Brief article. Gigatons of CO2 is heavier than, like, you have to multiply by 3 basically to get back to the number. So there's basically 216 gigatons of carbon that we think we've emitted. So what does this mean? It basically means reforesting only makes sense. There's only as much space to reforest as exactly the space that was deforested. And so if you try and reforest, this is a little bit hard to explain, and I don't always do it well. If you try to reforest in exchange for fossil fuel emissions, you've gotten rid of the space to, oh, I've got myself in a pickle here. Let me try this one more time. Sorry, guys. Basically, the space to plant a tree is a good. It's easier to plant a tree than it is to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And so exchanging tree planting, which is a limited amount which the future generation would also find cheaper, for something that's more expensive but isn't a limited resource, doesn't necessarily make sense. I'm seeing some nods, so I think I got that point across. Another one is, like, you might not want to do the cheapest things if the more expensive things take longer to build up to. We need to get to net zero in every sector. Do we want to start with the cheapest sectors, or do we want to start developing technology from the more expensive sectors? And so this doesn't end up being a simple conclusion about the climate at all. And so it brings us back to this theme again. climate change is complicated. Be humble and be curious, and try and work out as much as you can, working with people who have different expertise than you and who can uncover sides of it that you haven't necessarily thought of. And so that, I don't know where I am with time. Oh, I went a bit quickly. Okay, we have more time to discuss. That brings us to the project I wanted to do with you guys. How many of you guys have seen Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead? Yes. That doesn't surprise me. Okay. So it's a play. It's kind of a riff off Hamlet, very witty. And in it, there's a game where you can only speak in questions. So one thing that I don't know if you noticed when I gave this talk, but a lot of what I had to say as ideas was really a question that I didn't have an answer to. And that's quite a useful contribution to a field, is flagging the key uncertainties in that field that we need to get, that we can't move forward without respecting in some way, whether it be realizing we can't answer it and moving around it, or focusing on getting an answer to it. And so what I was hoping we'd do today is get into groups and play the question game about climate change. So I'm going to explain the question game in questions. Would you like to try an experiment in co-thinking with me about climate change? Oh, you lost. Okay, so the deal is, thank you, that's very exciting. The deal is only answer me in questions. Okay, ready? For how many minutes can you speak only in questions? Want to try and answer? No, okay, so.
What do you mean?
Yes! Yes! Can you think of questions that follow on from the ones that you hear? And here's a tool that my friend thought of. So you can use a yes, but. So we're going to split up into groups, and we're going to ask questions of each other, or we're going to put questions into the circle. And if you want, you can think of a yes, but question to someone else's question, or you can think of a question that's totally new and that exposes a new part of the space that someone else hasn't mentioned before. Be patient with silence. Be comfortable. I put you guys on the spot in a massive way. Did you see how uncomfortable that was? That's going to happen. But I think it's a really useful space to be in, to be realizing you're trying to uncover new ideas and new angles of this area. And then as you're doing it, please see what patterns you spot in the questions that come up. Do they tend to gather around certain kinds of uncertainties? Do they focus on certain stakeholders, certain key players? Are they of the kind that can be answered by science? Do they need like social science to answer what's going on with the key uncertainties in this field? And last of all, I was hoping that we might record the questions. Like I said, I think it'd be really interesting to gather a really wide swath of interesting questions about climate change into one place. And so if some of you have laptops, do we have many laptops? Yeah, a fair number, that's great. If you wouldn't mind sharing them and adding it to this Google Doc, we'll end up with a really cool, I think, list of questions at the end. So I didn't explain that super well, obviously, but do we have any questions about this idea of the question game?
The Google Doc, you need to request access to edit it.
That's silly. Okay, anyone else? Yeah. Great. Sorry, guys. That makes sense. Anything else? Anyone else? Yeah, shout out? Okay, it should be fine now, I think. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we're going to split up by topic. So here's the topics that I thought would be quite interesting to discuss. So we have the direct effects of climate change. So this is what is the severity of climate change and how do we tell the importance of it? And then what about the human system and its instability in relation to climate change? The next topic area is the tractability. So I want one group to think about political and social interventions and another one to think about technological interventions. And then we have a group talking about solar radiation management, which is kind of a big puzzling topic. And then let's talk about EA-focused questions. So you're each going to pick one of these topics and arrange into a group based on it. Can I have some people to be the leaders of each group? So does somebody want to lead a group on EA-focused climate change questions? Yeah, nice, okay. And so afterwards, hold it up and bring people around. How about a group on neglectedness, tractability, and political and social interventions? Gideon, can you do some? How about the technology interventions? Oops. Human systems, instability to climate systems. Like the human systems instability? There you go. And the direct effects of climate change? Yeah, nice, okay. And then we have solar radiation management. You guys are here? You two, okay. So if you can hold up your question, your topic area, and then go find the topic you'd be most excited to discuss, that would be really great. Oh, and move your chairs into a circle when you get there, I think.
Now it's on viewer. Now everyone with the link is a viewer and not an editor. Perfect. That's great. Technology, right?
Right. Okay, so, we've got a very big group over there. What's that group? Okay, so, very quickly go around and say your names, okay? Do you guys want to split into two groups? Would that be better? What group are we? Of which one? Social? Okay, so do we have names going around the circles? Do we have somebody who can take laptop? Okay, so I'll let you guys finish questions at your own pace, but I've got to tell you one more little thing we have. Inside your cards, people who are lucky enough to get one, you'll notice there's an envelope with some extra questions. So we're going to do this a bit like a competition. All the groups set up with a laptop that have a laptop to record the questions, or a piece of paper to add the questions to the document. Okay, so when I finish speaking, finish doing names, and then Ask questions of each other that you think are important, crux, unknown questions in this area. We're going to check in after 5 minutes and see whether we've managed to generate questions for 5 minutes. I'm going to ask for a thumbs up, thumbs down. If you're still going, give me a thumbs up, and I'll give us another 5 minutes. And then afterwards, we'll switch into discussion. So this is the kind of idea generation period for questions. Most of the time we'll spend discussing the questions that came up, of course. If you get stuck, you have in your envelopes some questions that were prepared beforehand. And so pull up some of those before you give up and see if they help you open up a new area to think about. Yep. The envelope is only for really awkward silences. I wish I had one of those in everyday life. Do the questions have to follow on from each other? No, they don't. Sometimes it will be useful, and sometimes it will be great to ask a question that's out of left field. Any last questions about question game? Ing? No, okay. All right, so the time is 32 past. I will check in 5 minutes. On your mark, get set, go. This is amazing. No group seems to run out. Can every group take 3 questions out of their envelope and throw them into the mix just to spice things up? And I forgot one thing. When you hear a question that you're really excited about, give it some jazz hands, because in the discussion, you're going to come back to that. So you got to sort of take 3 questions out of your envelopes and add them to the pool. Can you... You really like a question. You're like, yeah. And that's time. I am so impressed. I'm going to let you guys keep talking to each other. Finish the question you're on, that's fine, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to... I had no idea you'd be able to do this for so long. I mean, I could do this all day. I think it's really interesting to generate questions, but I'm really impressed. I thought maybe groups would run out after a few minutes, so this is awesome. I'm really, really excited to see the questions you've generated. I want to just open it up to you decide as a group if you want to keep playing, generating questions, if that's feeling helpful. Or you might want to think about some of these discussion questions, which I'm not going to bother reading out because you can see them, I guess. So just thinking a little bit more of a meta way, what was the experience like to generate questions? How did it change your relationship with the topic of climate change? What did you notice about how we would answer those questions? Do we need to answer all of those questions to be able to act on climate change? Who would we need to ask to answer those questions? Are they questions you'd already thought of? Are they questions that are normally established? Are they questions that you hear in mainstream thinking? Or are they questions that we could contribute to mainstream thinking? And feel free to just add notes to the document, even if they're not in question form anymore. Maybe go back to a few of your favorite questions and talk about whether or not you've heard them being taken up and what you'd like to see in them. Those sorts of discussion questions. So I just let you free. You can also keep playing if you want. I'll add them to this document. So if you guys want to save this bit.ly, I'll add the questions that we had in advance to them if you want. Would that be nice? Yeah. Great. Yeah, and feel free to churn through the rest of the questions. I forgot to say massive thanks to Gideon, who can wave and smile, who's holding a... Stay behind afterwards, because there'll be more mingling time, for helping me generate those questions. And you guys will help generate the next batch when I run this at EAGX Boston next week. So thank you. Yeah, thank you to him. Does that make sense for the next stage? This is just like, think about that experience, keep playing if you want, and ask yourself some questions about the experience of generating questions. Great, okay. I'm going to bring us together in 8 minutes to just wrap up with some ideas. I think I'm meant to wrap up now because of the time, and I do want to leave you with one last little anecdote or fable. But it makes me sad because these discussions sound really interesting. One nice thing is we've got the room booked for networking around climate change after this. And so hopefully you can follow up with some of the conversations you've been having and get a little bit deeper into things and also talk to people who are in different groups. I want to end with this slide. This is a story I find really useful. Does anyone recognize this? Maybe a few of you might. So there's a fable that's quite ancient about blind men gathering around an elephant. The elephant is bigger than any one of them can touch, right? And some of them are touching the tusks, and some of them are touching the tails, and some of them the feet, and some of them the elephant's stomach, and they all come up with different conclusions about what the crux of an elephant is. Some of them say an elephant is hard and sharp, and some say it's ropey, and some say it's smooth, and other people say it's really knobbly. And they kind of end up arguing in this fable. And the point I want to leave you with is I think climate change is, for us as researchers and thinkers, kind of like the elephant is the blind man. It's too big to conceive of. And so what I think is really important if we are to enter climate change efficiently as a community of people who have certain strengths and certain weaknesses is that we respect the size of the elephant and don't find ourselves arguing with people who see things a different way too much. We have as our strengths some real open-mindedness and willingness to ask difficult questions and willingness to hear difficult answers as well. And that can be a real strength as long as we respect the complexity of the thing we're interacting with. You all generated so many questions that probably would take years to properly answer. And our relationship with a field that has that ability, I think, is a really important thing that we do carefully and gently and well. So my advice for you, if you approach climate change or any other topics, in some ways climate change was just a good example, but this will apply to many other things we do in EA, is to slow down, ask questions, and look for complexity. And I was told to give you guys some actions. I think you can apply this to any resource you come across in climate change. I had a really interesting day when I went along to hear some climate skeptics having a kind of one of their chief scientists come and give a talk to them about climate about their science. It was really interesting. So you can carry this anywhere. There's some resources I've really liked. This is a really interesting book about the history of the idea of extinctions and how it developed alongside society at different ages. There's also a really good book about the original papers around climate change. So how did this idea develop and what did we find out along the way? Probably all of you have heard of this book. It's just wonderful, asking some difficult questions about how we respond to climate change and what really adds up. Effective Environmentalism has put together a really cool living resource of all the EA posts about climate change. Read those by all means, but don't make that your only reading either. Those are really good. There's some really, really good work in EA and climate change. I'm super excited to see us build on in the coming years. And then this is what happens when you Google Thanksgiving dinner for a photo. Don't forget to talk to people that you normally don't agree with on these topics and try and figure out inside the things that they're saying, that the elephant is pointy, that the elephant is ropey. What are the ideas that they maybe have come across that you haven't thought of that angle yet? And so with that, this is my first time running this session, and it was really an experiment. I know I kind of fluffed the explanation there in the middle, but I'm really curious what it was like as a session to experience. So you can accost me afterwards and be as honest as you like. Or you can fill in this anonymous survey and just let me know, does it work as a way to start conversation and do some idea generation? I see some nods, yay. And how could I run it if I was going to run it again? I just think it's a really cool place we're at to have had this field that's such a big field in the larger world and hasn't been such a big field in EA, and we're trying to approach it in a sensible way. And it's a headache, and it's hard, and it's too big for any one person to come to the answers. So I'm really excited for what we've started doing to work on building off each other's ideas and developing some patience and curiosity with such a complicated topic. So I think we can all congratulate each other. A round of applause for everyone's participation. Thank you for You generated so many cool ideas. I'm going to post the ideas that were in the folders on that. They're already posted on that same link if you want to look at them, and I'll try and put up a sort of summary of what happened on the forum in a few weeks. So yeah, without any further ado, I think, do I hand over to you right now, Gideon? Okay. I'm going to hand straight to Gideon, but thank you guys for playing along. That was great.